Great, greeting everyone. This is Payman Lorenzo, your host of the Leader Well podcast. Again, today I have an incredible guest for you. This is part two of our amazing conversation with my good friend Dan McPherson. We had an amazing conversation earlier today. Part one. This is part two. He has an incredible story. I'm not going to go over it again, but suffice to say that we could talk for, as I said, we can do an entire season just between me and him talking about everything he had to overcome as a true survivor in the truer form. But we talked about that in part one. Part two is going to be more about what he's doing now, what's his business. Welcome back on the show, brother.
Man, I'm super excited to continue our conversation. And yeah, we probably could take a whole season, but that's only because I never stop talking.
Well, I found my match because I'm also quite chatty, as you can imagine, but we might do that in the future. Who knows where we can go from
there. You go.
But,
we'll do a telethon. We'll just keep on going for 24 hours.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All right. So now let's talk about your business. Tell us, what are you up to? What are you doing? What are you creating as far as impact in this world?
Well, I mentioned earlier that my mission is to inspire true generational change in the world. And I'm very clear that my mission isn't to create that. It is not on me to create it. It's on me to be the conduit that allows it to occur. And that generational change, the end result is that human trafficking, hunger, poverty, racism will all be significantly decreased in a worldwide sense. By 15% in 15 years is the target we're aiming at. Having looked at that and said, that's the legacy, that's what we're aiming at, I looked and said, how can that be done? And we stepped back and looked and said, okay, that can be done if enough people, enough to get us to a tipping point, achieve their dreams. In other words, if they're living in that transformed way, that they'll get there. And having done math that I won't bore you with, I can tell you that math comes out to right about 1 million people. So we picked the sexy number of 1 million. And my goal is to then say, how can I influence those million people to that in a way that allows them to get where they want to go, either to help them uncover their dreams or to realize them or to accomplish them and live through them. And in my best analysis, what I found is two things. One, I had to know who they were, and two, I had to know what I could do. Who they were, I looked and said, well, women are better than men. Oh boy, there's my conflict statement.
Box, you know?
That's right. But there's a specific way that I mean that. Women historically will succeed. They're 30% more likely to succeed than men, and they succeed 30% faster than men. So if you want something done quickly, getting that done through women is a very positive and powerful way to go. If you look for creatives, you want newness and light, that's where it comes from. So you think of all the artists and musicians and gamers and people like that. And then if you look for resiliency, the LGBTQ community has an immense amount of that. If you combine those three things together, movement, newness, resiliency, that gives you a ball of momentum going forward to create that generational change. So that's the who. And then there's the what. I looked and said, well, I could do a lot of different things because I have an extensive background. I've been through a lot in my corporate world, but what is it that's missing? What is it that isn't getting done? And the more that I asked that question, the more that I discovered that the work I was doing with my one-on-one clients, the work that I was doing even in group training, and as I would encounter people on the street in many cases, was around what I could call basics, blocking and tackling. In a sense, it is that we aren't trained in this world on how to be an effective leader in a true sense of the word that focuses on people. We aren't trained how to communicate. What the most common miss that people have is broken communication. We aren't trained how to be persuasive and how to have it not be dirty and sleazy and slimy and bad. And so we aren't trained on sales, and we certainly aren't trained on how to make our time effective. Notice I didn't say time management, but effective. So I started looking at that and said, that is the foundations of success. And that has become a lot of what I worked on. And we can dig into that as much as you like.
Sure. Now, first of all, you said you want to impact 1 million people. Is that worldwide? Is it in the US? Is that in the Western world?
Oh, it's worldwide. You know what? A human being is a human being, and I'm good with that. I have clients and friends in probably close to 100 countries now. I'm connected in various ways to well over 100 countries. And I just love people and culture and connection and variety and the eclectic nature of our stories.
Mhm. Absolutely. You mentioned, I agree with you totally, because after living in 10 countries on 4 continents, the one thing I realized and I learned is that it doesn't matter where we are from, whether we're white, black, blue, green, whatever, yellow, we all at the end, we all human being, we all have the same dreams and aspirations, the same thing we want. So it's just, and at the source, we all connect, we're all one. So for me, it's all the same. Just like they say in Asia, same, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the more, I think the more that your viewpoint widens
Mhm.
and broadens as you travel and live in different places as you have. I've not had the good fortune to live in a lot of countries, but I've traveled to a decent number and thankfully growing. The more that you do, the more that you see that same, but also the honor of the different and the
Mhm.
ability to learn of various cultures and various backgrounds, and that the way I saw something is not the only way. The way I grew up with something is not the only way. We're the
Absolutely.
same at a core and value, but different in how that value translates.
Absolutely. And I grew up, and I was lucky enough to grow up in 3 different, entirely different cultures, and continents and things. So that's been a blessing for me to learn and see things from different perspectives. So, and I'm couldn't be happier with that.
That's wonderful that you've been able to do that.
Yeah. Now, one thing that you mentioned, I would like you to expand on. You mentioned that there's a, you mentioned time management and being efficient with your time. I want you to expand on that.
Absolutely. I grew up, like I'm sure many people have, hearing you need to manage your time. You need to eat time management classes, got to do that. And when we manage our time, it's a little bit like the difference between leadership and managing. When we manage our time, we're focused on the practical, physical things. We're also taught to look at time through a very specific and in my mind, very limited lens. If instead we say, how can I be effective with my time? We start looking at the mindset that's around it. We start looking at the behaviors that are around it. And then we also start looking at the practicals as well. So if leadership is about people and management is about tasks, and so the leadership is about people who complete the task, both cases the tasks get done, but the focus is very different. Time effectiveness has that very different focus. And what I've found when I train this, and I train it a little differently than anyone I've encountered, but also it's the most requested training that I do in many ways, is I will say as I'm training it that most of time effectiveness is about helping you be calm. It's about removing the things that keep you from being calm. In other words, it is about emotion and behavior and less about the tasks. Now, the tasks and how you approach them, and I give a lot of strategies about those matter, but those are the fulfillment of a changed mindset and behavior. And the reason most time management training fails today is because they approach the do this differently without the why behind the what. And without the why behind the what, you have nothing.
Totally agree with that. Now, wow, there's so many things so many direction we can take this into, but all right, tell us, who would you say is your ideal client for your business?
Well, I can tell you what I thought when I first started, which is, are they breathing? If they're breathing and they'll come near me and be willing to do business with me, that was the great client. And I find for many of the people that I start working with, that's where we start, right? Is that we start our new business and we're like, I hope somebody will do business with me, without recognizing that trying to be everything to everybody, you're nothing to nobody. And I learned that the hard way. People were like, you have to niche. You have to understand who you're aiming at. And I said, no, you do. I don't. And as I found out, I was wrong. I mean, I hate that word, but I say it a lot. I was wrong. And I had to figure out who is it that I aim at. And what I've found through a lot of evolution, those groups that I mentioned before, the women, the creatives, the people in the LGBTQ community, that's probably 90% of my clients meet at least one of those criteria. What I find more specifically is it's those for those whom hear my voice and say, that connects, and who in most cases are looking for, how do I find calm and want to understand my next steps. I think as I've stepped back and looked at all the one-on-one clients I've worked with, and I'm really proud of these clients. They're amazing. We've helped them add millions of dollars for the ones who want to focus on growing their business. We've helped them achieve their dreams for the ones who the money isn't the exact focus. We've done what's right for them. And maybe from a business standpoint, one of the things I'm most proud of is that without any binding contract, they typically stay with me for 3 years. And that work together, that hand in hand partnership that it becomes when they don't have to stay, but they choose to, it matters a lot to me. And what I have, as I've analyzed the work we've done together, I found that it really is as simple as saying, what is it that helps them find or recover their calm and understand what are the next steps? Everyone starts in a different spot. The next steps are going to be different for everybody. I don't have this one size fits all thing. I have a lot of resources, and I bring the ones to bear that matter to that person. We talk about the principles that are true everywhere, but the practicals that are true for them. But that ideal client is someone who says, I'm looking for calm and the next steps. And then we do everything we need to get them on their path. And the path for everybody, the one thing that is the same for everybody, is it goes calm, clarity, focus, momentum. The only path to true momentum is to go calm, clarity, focus. And I'm glad to talk about that if you want. But that's
please. We're gonna do that after.
Ooh,
okay.
That's a sexy topic. It's one of my favorites. I've done 2 or 3 podcast episodes talking about this. First, we have to find our calm. If we're not calm, we're making decisions from emotion. We're running all over the place, where we are making decisions from fear or from smallness, from scarcity, from whatever it might be. So once we find our calm, now we can start asking the right questions. I believe the number one skill you can build in the world is to be more curious. So you get to that spot where you can be more curious. Then after you have calm, now it's about clarity. It's where am I going? It's understanding what I'm looking to achieve, like what legacy am I looking to use, and then building it backwards. And what I mean by building it backwards is most people say, here's what I'm going to do, and I hope it ends up where I want to go. And I say, where do you want to go? And then build it back so you know that you're actually on that path. And there's a lot more I could say about that. I do tons about North Star work, but the short version of that piece of it is that you do vision and then strategy and then tactics and then tasks. And then you validate it by going through it the other way. But most people build it backwards, which is wrong. So that's clarity. The next is focus. And so you can have clarity and then go after it in 50 different ways. And that just doesn't work. Then you get 10% of 100 places instead of 100% of anywhere. And focus, think of this example. If our resources are represented by water, then if I pour water through a hose and it comes out a sprinkler, all I did is get the grass wet. But if I focus that water until it's as tight as a laser, did you know, because most people don't, that it will cut rock faster than a laser will?
Oh, yes.
So my goal is to help people create their water laser instead of their water sprinkler using their focus. And that's about how fast and how easy they can go towards their dream. And then if you do that, if you apply focus to clarity with calm, that will create momentum and you'll start your flywheel spinning.
Amazing. There's a couple of things that come to mind, but the first one I want to tackle is, speaking of clarity, one of the obstacles that we all as entrepreneurs face is the shiny syndrome object. You start on one path, one thing, and then you're distracted left to right, crypto, e-commerce, coaching, real estate, whatever, you name it, stocks. So how the hell do we focus on one thing for the first at least 12 months until you get to scale one business until, if not 7, at least 6 figures, and then you can go into somewhere else. So how do you have any concrete actionable tips for us? Maybe I'm talking about myself right now here. Focus on one thing, right? Because you have it's a curse and a blessing at the same time. We have so many opportunities, and once you get involved, especially me through this podcast, I have offers thrown at me left and right. They all look amazing. So how the hell do I focus on just one? I understand that one of the most important skills to learn is the power of saying no. So how do you?
It is,
How
and
do you do that?
I'll give you a practical related to saying no, and then I'll answer your broader question, because this is one of the most common questions I get asked. It's one, to be fair, that I've struggled with, even though I know how to go through it. So it is definitely hard. The practical around saying no, and I took this from an episode of the Tim Ferriss show, so I can't claim it myself, but it's helped change my life and many others, is change your default. It's easy to say change your default from yes to no, but change it. Recognize that a yes is a disguised no. And now instead be hell yes or no. Those are the only two options. There are no yeses, because a yes is a disguised no. A yes is obligation. A yes is, I feel like I should. What are they going to think? Oh, I could. Yeah, it sounds okay. And that's all BS. That is all a no that you're just not calling a no. And so it's either hell yes or it's no. And that'll automatically change about 90% of your bandwidth and open it up, which is a beautiful thing. When I talk to a guest or a potential guest for the podcast, I'm talking to them and I'm either like, hell yeah, or I'm like, yeah, I could, in which case I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe not right now. Let's revisit that in a few months when the timing makes more sense. Or I look at a business opportunity that approaches me and I'm like, I could do it. Or a friend calls me for dinner. Yeah, I could. But am I like, yes, I want to, or am I like, I could? If I could, it's now a no. And that has been one of the harder transitions for me, but I hope that's helpful for you.
Amazing. Love that. Yeah. Wow.
Now, about your broader question about the shiny object, man, we all struggle with that. And when I talk about this, there's a whole extended path. I'll give the very short version. It starts with understanding the whole water sprinkler laser thing, right? That if I focus on a bunch of things, I don't go anywhere. But there's another way to look at that and see what really happens. If you were to picture yourself standing in the dark on top of a hill with a bucket of water next to you, and around you, surrounding you, are a bunch of small fires. Those fires represent all of our tasks, all the opportunities, all the things that we could do. The bucket of water represents, once again, our resources, our time, our money, our effort, our opportunity, all the things that we can pour on something. And what if you don't do anything, the fires are just going to overwhelm you. What most people will do is they will, despite not seeming like they had one, reach in their pocket and pull out a teaspoon. And they'll go, oh, a teaspoon. And they will take a teaspoon of water and put one on every fire. But if you put a teaspoon of water on a fire, what happens? Steam. That's it. Fire doesn't go out, but you feel better because you handled every fire. It's like the old school talk shows where they'd spin plates until one fell, and they would just spin as many plates as they could. It's the same thing. As we love the psychological gratification of having put a teaspoon of water on every fire, but all we're doing is fooling ourselves and making it feel like there's progress when there's actually absolutely none. The better answer, but much harder, is to look around and ask which one of these things, if I did it, now it does require where you're going, by the way, which one of these things, if I did it, would make all of the others easier or go away. And then you pick up the bucket, you bend your knees because it's a heavy bucket, and you walk over to that fire and you dump it only on that fire. That means all of your resources go to one fire. That sounds great. The water runs down. The one fire actually goes out. Some of the other fires get smaller. Like a video game, the water starts refilling and you can do it again. And eventually you get in control of the fires. That sounds great. Here's the problem. The number one problem with it is you have to let all the other fires burn, which means you're going to piss people off. You're going to upset people. You're going to have people who won't ever talk to you again. You're going to let people down. You're going to have tasks that you can't do because everybody's like, oh, I can let some others burn, until they actually have to. Until they actually have to make the decision to let other people be unhappy, or to let themselves be unhappy because they had some urgent, important things that they chose not to do because their focus was in one place. Now, all of that is helped by, and I'll give you just a little extension of it, is helped by, people say, how do I decide which thing is the most important? Oh my gosh. is you make a list, you have it prioritized in order with the amount of time that it takes. That's a whole different part of the training, but you have a list in order, a priority list of all the things. That allows you to say this is a now thing or a later thing, because your mind is a very tricky psychological little bubble toy thing. And so if, let's say I encounter a new thing. So Shiny Bob comes up to me and says, I have this opportunity. I can look and I can look at my list and I can take this Shiny Bob opportunity and hold it up to number one, the thing that I've chosen to do, to put all my resources into. And I can say, will this new thing, will Shiny Bob move me further, faster toward my one goal than number one will? If the answer is yes, then I do it. If the answer is no, then I go down to number 2, number 3, number 4. Oh, it fits at number 5. Here's where psychology comes in. It fits at number 5. If I write it down on my actual physical list, it will leave my mind. It will no longer tug at me and make me feel like I should do it, because I scheduled it. I literally scheduled it and put it out there, but now I don't have to feel like I have to do it. I don't have to actually do it, and I can keep my focus. Lots of other stuff I can talk about on that, but does that help a little bit?
Well, I'm so glad I'm recording this, because I'm definitely going to be rewatching this myself, so I don't have to take notes right now. So yeah, absolutely amazing. Now, you mentioned a list. So do you have a rule of thumb as to how many items you should have on that list? If number one doesn't help you, so is it number 2? So do you have a list of top 5, top 10, or doesn't matter?
Every single item that moved, so I follow what's called a decision filter. When I encounter something new, I ask, does this move me closer to my goal or further away? If it moves me further away, it goes away. I'll never think of it again, even if I loved it. If it moves me closer to my goal, I go over to my list and I ask, does it move me further, faster than this? Does it make a greater impact than this? Does it make it, until I find the spot and I write it down? I don't care if we'll call it my later list, is 5,000 items long. It's prioritized in order. And so number 5,000 may never get done, or it may. Sometimes sometimes a pandemic hits, your entire priority list changes, and you have to go back and reorder it. So at the beginning of the pandemic, that's what I did. This is before my heart attack. But before that, I paused and I said, all right, let me go back and relook at my list. Well, prior to that, my number 1 had been speaking events. I was booked to speak in 20 countries. I was good to go. All of my effort was going toward making that happen. Pandemic hits. Well, that couldn't be my number 1 anymore. It dropped to like number 20 or 30. It was still there, but I had 20 or 30 things that could be more impactful, and building our online platform, Foundations of Success, became number 1. And so I started pouring effort into that, and that made a big difference. So that's why we make our list, but we also make it so that we know. You ever have that thing that you're like, oh, I want to do this someday, and yes, it would move me forward, but I know I can't do it now. It goes on the list. I don't care if the list is 1,000 items long, as long as it's in the right order, as long as I understand the right amount of time that it's going to take. And there's a whole different thing I could get into about why you need to double that time, because we suck at estimating. And so as long as that is there, it gives me my pre-made decisions. So now I don't have to fight to make decisions. And I set up calendars in a very specific way, lots of other stuff. As you can hear, I'm pretty passionate about time effectiveness, and I help a lot of my clients with it. And I'm actually debating doing a public training on this again. I haven't done one in probably 3 years, 2 or 3 years. I've done it for my clients, but I haven't done one broadly. So maybe I need to do that again. But it is so important to understand how to make that decision and how to feel good about it.
Love that. Amazing. You've been spitting fire. I'm so glad I'm recording this. Awesome. Now, you told us about all the things you're doing. You're doing amazing things, where it's training with sales, public speaking, as well as time management. Now, if you look at all of these areas, I want you to share with us an example of the most remarkable example of transformation you've seen from one of your clients as a result of you working with them.
Well, as a transformation coach, in many ways, I don't use that title very often, but as a guy who helps people toward transformations, we've had some incredible ones. And the story that I tell maybe most commonly is still the one that's the sexiest, but I might give you a part B to give a different one, because I think they're amazing. But I'll give the one that is that's super sexy. One of my clients, they called me one night. They were a friend. They called me and they said, we had beers and we're going to start a company, which is always an auspicious start. And I went and I met with them and we talked, and they wanted to start a very niche company, really small niche. And I looked at everything that they had and we talked, and I said, hey, if you do the things that we agree to, notice I didn't say that I say. I am not dictatorial as a coach. I'm a collaborative coach. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to help you achieve my dream, but to achieve yours. But if you do the things we agree to, then within 3 years, you'll have $1 million business. 3 years later, $1.1 million. Then now they are one of the 2 leaders in their entire industry, with celebrities on their product and everything. And the crazy part is, here's what they do as a multi-million-dollar company. They make wooden accessories for tabletop role-playing games. They make dice trays. Whoa. And have built a multi-million-dollar business from zero. So you see why that's the sexy example, right? And they're amazing. They do incredible work, but that's one. I think I could give you 20, but I will give you a second one because I think that I think it hits a different space. And I work with coaches. I work with brick and mortar businesses. I've had experience in all this. I actually have clients across 15 industries. So, hey, if anyone's listening, message me. When I work with these people, I love to help them figure out what was holding them back, build the strategies and strengths and foundations to go forward, and then move forward. And one of my clients is a chiropractic office, and they are amazing. They've been in business for 30 years. He does great healing work. He's been on my podcast, such a cool guy. Been in business for 30 plus years. And already had a loyal following, already creating a lot of success, most heart-centered guy that you would ever imagine. And I happen to be a patient there. I've been a patient there for 30 years now. And I know personally the healing that he creates. And we started talking one day, and he said, I want to focus more on the business and grow it. And we've been able to, even during the pandemic, grow the business. And a 30-year mature business, that doesn't, and brick and mortar, that doesn't happen real often. Oh, no. After the pandemic, grow it more. And in fact, he's even now been able to become a personality outside of it and put out and publish his first book, do a course, grow the business, add an additional line of revenue to the practice, and have a better, more fulfilled life with a staff who loves him. Amazing. And run it as a leader who truly understands business in a very different way than he once did. And I'm just so proud of them and their progress and how they've grabbed onto that. You don't see that for a lot of 30-year business owners.
That's amazing. Wow. It's all about impact. That's what really fuels me. And when you see impact in other people that you bring in, that's the ultimate reward as far as I'm concerned.
Impact is really everything in many ways, right? It's we are amplified through our impact on others. This is 0% about ego and everything about impact. And that's so important. And I think once I got past the insecurity that I held on to for so many years, it allowed me to have such greater impact. And once I recognized that my entire job in the world is to do everything I can to help other people win, the rest was easy.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, I'd like to get your feedback on something. One of the major, foundational principles of business is a numbers game. And over the years, I get to a point that, especially once I made the switch from chasing, money to pursuing purpose and impact, I've seen quite the opposite, that now it's not all about the numbers, it's about relationships, because people love doing business with people they can connect with, relate, and trust. So as time goes by, as I get more and more into this impact movement, I realize that no, business is not a numbers game. Business is more a relationships game. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are, as with most things in society, that we have a tendency to go from one extreme to the other. And what I find is, for many years, it was numbers. I grew up that way. I was trained that way. And now you hear, oh, numbers don't matter. Numbers are irrelevant. And that is wrong. Now, I will tell you that the the primary focus should be serving people, should be helping people. That's the guidance. But those who are saying numbers are irrelevant miss a key truth. Without profit, we lose the privilege to serve, period.
Totally.
And so if you don't treat what you do as a business and I'm not saying treat it as a business, meaning be corporate, be in the corporate world, but treat it as a business in there's strategy and there's understanding. And I make decisions that involve making money and saving money and doing these things. If we don't do that, then we'll be part of the businesses that fail so quickly and that lose that privilege to serve, and we limit and lose our impact. So I believe that, as with most of these things, there is a middle ground. And I teach my clients to have a big boy P&L from day one. Actually, they'll have a P&L that the same one you would use for a $200 million business. We have them use for a $50,000 business, because now they don't have to change it. They've set up the structure and strategy, but it also allows them to think about their business in a different light and make decisions in a different light. We have them look and make strategic goals. We have them do a budget for the year, things like that, have an accountant, things like that. And I want to be clear, this stuff doesn't have to cost money to do. There's some of it that will. You have an accountant, it will. But a lot of this is just saying, I will, even if I'm afraid of the numbers, even if I don't understand them, I work with artists and musicians. You want to talk about people who don't like to think about numbers a lot of the time, right? Right. I work with the people who at their core, healers and people like that, who are like, oh, numbers, they're terrible. And I help them to see that they don't have to be scary. That numbers don't have to be overwhelming. They don't have to be complicated, but there are certain ones you need to look at. For example, in sales, it's helpful to understand that there are only 3 numbers. There are 500 numbers that can come off of them, but there are only 3. How many people you talk to, how much or how many of them you sell, and how much you sell to each one. Those are the only 3 numbers that exist in sales. Everything else comes off of that. So if you look at those 3, you can make almost every decision that is outward, external, proactive about your business. And if you look at your P&L and you look at 3 or 4 numbers there, you can. So you don't need to know 100 numbers, but you got to know some. So I think there's a balance in there. But I do agree with the core part of that philosophy, which is people matter most.
Totally. Absolutely. Now let's move on to something that is crucial in business, which is, for some, it's even the foundation of a business, the offer, especially having an irresistible offer. What would you say is your irresistible offer to attract your clients?
Well, I was hoping as I grew up that it would be my smile. And as it turns out, that didn't pay quite as well as I hoped. I would say that it's an irresistible offer in many cases is tied to which thing are you offering, right? Like which thing are you putting out there? Because of that, there's a degree to which it is different from my online learning platform compared to if I'm presenting for a speaking opportunity, compared to coaching. But here is the core that is true for all of them for me. My goal is to help you get an immensely larger multiple of anything that you would pay. That if I provide, for example, if you spend $10,000 on an entry-level coaching program with me, and that my expectation is over the course of a year, it's either going to save or make, could be either one, as much as 10 times that. That's my internal target. Now I'm careful not to promise that because I'm not an idiot either, right? And it depends upon the relationship and how it's done. But here is even taking it a step further. One of my propositions is that value propositions is that I like to help people get away from thinking that they're paying for information, because you can Google anything. Any coach that says pay for my information,
Exactly.
I mean, that's what Google's for, right? I can go sit through anything on a YouTube video, whatever. What you're paying for, let's be very clear, is acceleration. What's the value of a year? When I share from stage, I share it this way. I say, anybody who says you can't do it on your own is wrong. They're lying to you. You can. It's the most expensive, most painful, longest way you can do it, but you can do it on your own. It may take you 20 years to do it on your own. It may take you 15 years. In fact, I'd put all of my content out for free at some point, but it's at my whim in a little bit here and a little bit there. And over 15 years, you might get it all. Or you might say, man, I want to get it faster. So you look at the online learning platform that I've created, and you might make your way through that in 3 to 5 years. And you paid a pretty low price, a couple $100 a month or a couple thousand a year. And you're like, I'm in and I got acceleration and I gained 10 years. That's fantastic. Or you might say, man, I really want to get this done in the next year and a half. I want to make 5 years of progress right now. Let's do the one-on-one coaching. That's why it costs more, guys. It's the only question you have to, 2 questions you ask yourself when you decide to work with somebody. Is this the right person for whatever criteria that is? Are they where I want to be? Do they know what I want to know? Do they have the skills? Do I trust them? All that. And how much time do I believe it will save me time? What is the value of a year? And if you look and say, I'm going to spend $20,000 on this person, you can either look and go, oh, that's expensive. Or you can say, what's the value of the 3 years that will save me? Would I pay $20,000 to get 3 years of my life back? And most of us, if we put it in that perspective, would do that. That's my value proposition.
I love that. I love that. Couldn't agree more with you. Absolutely. I'm so glad that I'm recording this because this is beyond fire. This is volcanic. You know, I love it.
Oh, thank you, man.
No worries, man. Now, what would you say for you is the number one challenge you're facing in your business?
Well, I think for me, it is, I'll give you one that is really specific to me and then give you what I think you're actually more asking that can be more applicable to everyone else, which for me, it has been adjusting to the fact that I do not have remotely the capabilities physically that I had a year and a half ago. And so I have no ability to push through or spend a certain amount of hours or something like that. And I had to adjust to a dramatically reduced workload and refining things. And I think very few people are really going to get that. And while there's value in talking about it, and I'm glad to, I would say, let's step into the piece that most people struggle with. And that has been my greatest struggle, because as much as I have training in a lot of different areas, and I can evaluate this particular area that I struggle in very well, it is not my strength. And that is marketing. Getting eyes on the prize, talking to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And it's just now that, well, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was starting to do that. Then I had heart attacks and I lost sort of that momentum. And now as I'm finally gaining bandwidth again in the last few weeks, I'm gaining that again. Fortunately, because I've ridden this rodeo a few times, like the I think the Ferris wheel is what I'm picturing in my head, rises up a little more quickly than it used to. And so those eyes can be there. I've been very fortunate to be on a couple TV shows, to be sharing podcasts like yours, and to do a number of things like that, but getting exposure that connects, not just exposure. Like somebody can see your picture a million times, it doesn't matter, but getting exposure that connects. And I think that takes 2 things. One, it takes repetition. People don't take action from one time. On average, we have to see, feel, or do something 8 times before we'll take action. And so that's why you see the same ad on TV over and over and over and over, is because they know they got to get to 8 at a minimum. And so for me, it has been about, how do I continue to get back out there? That's why in 2.5 weeks, it started to rebuild, but it isn't all the way there because I haven't re-hit the 8. The second is that communication doesn't occur if the person doesn't receive the message. I can say something all day long, but if I'm saying something that they don't hear, they don't connect, doesn't solve their problem, it doesn't matter. And so what I've been redoing just starting in the last couple of weeks is making sure that I'm sharing the right thing and getting into the right places. And I am not excellent at marketing. I can go talk all day. We can have these conversations. And so that becomes my marketing. And that's maybe a piece of advice that I would give everybody, is to understand that marketing may look different for you than the average bear. You mentioned earlier, people have 20 different ways to market. And you're right. Everybody's got their own way. And they're each really good for some people in some situations, but you've got to do what fits for you. And what fits for me is, I would rather do 20 podcasts a week than to do one paid ad.
Absolutely.
Now, I like paid ads. I like when they work, but I suck at them.
Oh yeah, especially when they change the algorithm every so often that you have
Yeah,
no
and you don't
control.
own your audience and all that. Yeah.
Exactly, just throwing money in the emptiness of whatever. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, speaking of that, how are you getting your clients for your business? Is it strictly through your podcast? Or you mentioned
It's
ads.
a bit of a mix, but I
Okay.
will tell you that there were two things that are very similar to each other that are the bulk of the people. The vast, I guess I'll say three. The first is that that my clients say, go to people and say, you need a Dan. There are two or three of my clients that they've come up with their little phrase that said, and what they say is, everybody needs a Dan. And I'm like, and it felt weird at first, but actually I'm kind of proud of that. I'm like, hey, fair
Sure.
enough. And so and it's that raving fan that you create. You don't need a million raving fans. The Kevin Kelly would tell you 1,000. And
1,000 true fans. Yes.
but a raving fan is different than a fan. A raving fan is one who can't help but talk about you. A fan is one who, if you're brought up, they'll talk about you. But a raving fan is one that they can't help it. It just pours out of them. And I'm fortunate to have a number of those. And so I've gained some clients from there. The second, and then I'll tell the third, which I think is the most powerful and the one that I would encourage everybody here to do. But the second is podcasts like this, that as I share on different podcasts, and I'm fortunate to be a guest on, whether it be a podcast, a TV show, a radio interview, or my own podcast. And I share, people hear and they go, wait a minute, I want to know a little more about that guy. And he's quirky, but he's my kind of quirky. And he's weird, but he's my kind of weird. And I want to know a little more about that. And people then message me and say, hey, Dan, I'd like to know more. Can you help me? And I'm so honored every time that occurs, because I've done it. I've reached out to people like that, but I just imagine someone listening to me talk. They have no idea who I am. They live somewhere in the world. They listen to me talk for an hour and they go, I got to have more of that. And I'm like, I'm so blown away, honored by that it's insane. The third, and this is the one that I really want to leave everybody with, because because it is what changed my life in such a powerful way, is that I learned every time that I meet somebody for a significant conversation, and every time that I'm interviewed or that I interview somebody, I ask three questions. And these three questions are gold. I've stolen a piece of them from different places. The first one is, how can I get better? And I mean it sincerely. Sometimes I have to ask the person like 4 or 5 times to like, no, I really mean it. Don't just be nice to me. Like, give me the thing. It's okay.
I asked that too at the end of the podcast. On my question too. So, do you have any tips for me to improve my podcast? I'm going to ask you that at the end of this podcast.
That's right. All right. See, I love that, and I do that every single time. And I've gained big tips, small tips, whatever. The second is, how can I serve or support you? And sometimes I'll have had ideas, or like, hey, other than introducing these people, whatever, how can I serve or support you? And then the third is, who do you know that I should know? Or if I'm talking about the podcast, who do you know that I should know or have on the show? And that question, that last question has been everything to me. And what I decided to do about 2 years ago is I decided that I would set aside, and this was a big commitment. So everybody that's listening, you may need to make it a little smaller for you, but I decided to set aside 5 to 10 hours a week that I would do 1-hour conversations. I don't do 30-minute intro conversations. I do an hour. Sometimes I do 30, but most of the time I do hour-long intro conversations, because I want to really be able to get to know this person, because I care about the relationship more than anything else. People matter most. Relationships are everything. And I would do 5 to 10 of those a week. And every one of them, I'm asking, who else should I know? Who else should I know? And what you would find is, if you talk to 10 people, you're going to ask them that question. 3 of them, well, say 4 of them aren't going to send you anybody. 3 of them are going to say, oh, I'll send you somebody, and they never do. 3 of them are going to send you to somebody or more than one person. And when they do, this is what's very interesting. We don't send people that have less influence than ourselves. We don't send people who aren't amazing. So what happens is you go up about a half level of influence, not quality of person. The people are the same quality, but the level of influence, you go up about a half level. Well, if you then ask those people, you go up another half level. And by the time you're 8 levels deep, you're 4 or 5 levels of influence higher. You've met all of these incredible people. And what I find is there are a huge amount of people that I've gained as collaborative partners, as speaking engagements, as things that would come out of that. And I've met so many amazing people. I've also unintentionally, frankly, discovered a number of clients that way, because we'll get to the end of the call and the person will say, Dan, will you please coach me? And I'll be like, I'm sorry, what? Because I wasn't pitching. Yeah. I wasn't like, oh, like, let me set this up for coaching. They'll ask, and I'm usually like, wait a minute, what? Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. But it's been my honor to have that occur. But that, I say, because that discipline, I did it for 80 weeks in a row. That discipline is something that changed my life. It's sort of like the Napoleon Hill, that process, as people read about it. It changed everything about my network, my connections. I now have connections all over the world, and some of them who are immensely influential. Some of them make 20, 30 million a year. Some of them connected to millions of people. And now they're friends of mine because I had this hour-long conversation. And I would tell you that if you want true marketing, if you want true growth and spread, do that. But recognize you better be eager, not impatient, because it doesn't happen fast.
Totally. Absolutely. Gold. Absolutely. That's also my approach. That's why I love to have this long conversation on my podcast, not just asking, what do you do? What are you doing? And all that, just a typical question. I want to get to know the person at a deep level, because we do business with people we can relate and connect. And the best way to do so is to talk about the person, to look under the hood, to see what's in the heart. So that's totally my approach. We're on the same page. And I will actually borrow that question that you mentioned, if I may, that says,
of course, I borrowed it.
What do you think? What do you think I should know? That's amazing, because I asked, you mentioned 3 questions, very powerful question. I fully believe in the power of asking the right questions. The number 1 is, how can I improve? I already asked that. Number 2 is, what do you think I should talk to, or along those lines?
No, the number 2 is, how can I serve or support you?
Yes, I asked that, but not on the podcast. I asked them before the podcast and after the podcast. But I will from now on, I will integrate and incorporate it inside the podcast as well.
Oh, see, I ask after. I will be clear. I ask outside of it, because I want to have that conversation separately. But I do it. We finish the recording, we stop the record button, and then I ask. Okay. And because I'm having that one-on-one follow-up. And then, who do you know that I should know? Or if it's for the podcast, who do you know that I should know or have on the show?
And that's what I do after the podcast, is not pitching anything, just helping, because
100%.
As a way to
I
give
pitch
back.
Nothing from
Absolutely. Same here. And also because I've seen firsthand the tremendous life-changing, positive effect of starting a podcast. So I'm a big, fan and, of pushing people to, not pushing, encouraging people to start a podcast, because I will share with them an actual real life story of a guy. I don't know if you've heard of him, Josh Elliott in Florida. He built an 8-figure business with 0 ad spend, using only the power of the podcasting. So what he does, I'm gonna send you this podcast to listen. I'm not affiliated with him. I'm not getting anything from him, but just because I want you to listen, I'm gonna summarize it for you here. That's what I usually do after the call, but I want to do it for the spirit of this podcast briefly to you as well. You're already doing everything. You have a wonderful podcast. You have probably, and that's not a compliment, that's an observation, probably the best voice I've heard in a long time. You should be on TV.
Wow.
You should have on radio. You. And I think that's a comment someone on the Serving Circle also mentioned to you last time that we were on. I think it was Trish that said you have an amazing voice, and that's so true.
Well, thank you for that, for sure. Hey, if anyone's got any radio openings, let me know. I'm in.
No, but seriously, so what this guy does, this Josh guy in Florida, he has a PR firm that helps businesses that are doing 6 and 7-figure to get more exposure through to PR. So what he does, so instead of him, cold calling, running ads and all that, because if I were to cold call you, say, or email you, say, hey Dan, I'm trying to help you with your marketing, whatever, you would either not respond or not interested, or say, sorry,
I wouldn't even read it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But instead, if I were to call you, hey Dan, my name is Payman, I'm the host of such a podcast, I love what you're doing, I would love to have you on my podcast to share your story. Now, the likelihood of you saying yes is tenfold higher. So what this guy does, he has clearly identified his ideal clients, which are, businesses doing 6 and 7 figures, trying to get more. So he reaches out basically to CEOs, and his ideal clients hang out on LinkedIn. So he reaches out to them and say, hey, my name is Josh. I'm the host of the Such and Such podcast. I love what you're doing. I would love you to come on my podcast to share your story. He's not pitching anything. He's just inviting them. He's getting a tremendous, conversion rate. He's doing 5 podcasts a week. So Monday to Friday, one guest a week. And then during the conversation, he talked with them for 45 minutes, an hour. He doesn't pitch anything. All he does is just get to know them, get to build a rapport, trust. But he does smartly, incorporate in his podcast some of the question that he would anyway ask in a discovery call. So he's basically interviewing his prospects. You know what I mean? So it does it in a smart way, in a smart way that he gets first to build rapport and trust. And because it's clearly identified as a little client, at some point they will ask him, so what about you, Josh? What do you do? And when he tells them, hey, I help, businesses doing 6, 7 figures to get more exposure to PR. And they will say, hey, that's exactly what I need. Can you help me? And then say, okay, sure. Let's set up a time to talk. That's how he's spending zero money on ads. And at the end
that's fantastic.
And at the end of the call, he asks one of your magic question, which is, mind you, not everybody that gets on the call is going to end up a client. And at that time, he says, hey, Dan, that was amazing talking to you. What do you know that as a story as beautiful as yours that would deserve to get more exposure to invite on the podcast? So he's not asking for any business referrals. He's asking for people to share their story. So by doing this, he's getting not only incredible unlimited streams of qualified leads, but also receptive leads. So I think for you, that would be a no-brainer to implement it. I don't know if you're implementing it to some degrees because you have the podcast, but now if you go directly after ideal clients and you just invite them on your podcast, but the number one thing, the most important thing is clarity to really identify your ideal clients so that they will ask you, hey, Dan, what do you do? And then when you tell them, say, hey, that's exactly what I need. Can you help me? And then you say, okay, let's set up a call after. For you, that would be a no-brainer. I'm not a coach, but if I were a coach, that would be my number one approach.
I appreciate that. And a number of my guests have either been or become clients. And I actually do a call before. Every single guest that I have on my show, I do an hour call beforehand. So we've already had a lot of those conversations.
Awesome. Beautiful. So you're already doing that. So that's a no-brainer. I'm surprised that not many people are doing that,
Well, but it takes a mindset towards strategy, and a lot of people are a strategy and service. And I did a free training about a year ago when I had a crazy beard in the middle of the pandemic that is called How to Build, Maintain, and Monetize a Podcast. And I talk about what's involved in that and using it a little more strategically. And one of the things that I share is just most people do not think of it strategically. They're jumping into a podcast because they got this emotional burr on their saddle that they want to do one. And I think it's great to do one, but it's also great to plan to have it matter, to have it move you further, faster toward your goal.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. That's amazing. We're on the same page. I love that. That's what I really love. Wow, that's incredible.
We're on the same page with a lot of things, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Now let's move forward because otherwise it's going to turn into another two-hour podcast. That's right. So now let's talk about something that is dear to both of us, which is cause. So I remember you mentioned at least two causes that are really, dear to your heart. One is helping people that are fighting and that are, that are suicidal, and one is people that are what was the other one you mentioned? I just have a blank right now, but you mentioned something very
helping to inspire generational change.
Yes. So what would you say for you is the cause among all of these that you're the most passionate?
Well, they're two really separate, but I think in many ways related things, because if so many in our world are struggling with mental health and they're struggling with emotional health and stability, then helping them find that calm that we talked about is a lot of what will allow them to take a step toward their dreams and therefore inspire generational change. So I believe that one builds into the other. But if you pull it apart, what I say is that my business is focused towards inspiring generational change. That's the that's the world of which we do. And my personal cause, that one that's deep connected to me, that I do outside the business as I'm forming a foundation for it, is to help prevent suicide. So I won't narrow it to one of the two, but I will differentiate them.
Absolutely amazing. Wow. Now, we all come in this world for a reason, for a purpose and a mission. What would you say is your purpose, your mission in this lifetime, Dan?
I think it's exactly what we've been talking about. It is to be a facilitator, a conduit, a translator that supports people as they uncover and achieve their dreams, and a voice that speaks out into the void in a way that needs to be heard about the importance of mental health and staying alive. In other words, to put it as I do in my podcast, I believe that my life at this point is to prove that no matter where you're from, no matter what you do, no matter what you've been through, that there are two things that are always true. There is always light through the darkness, and dreams are always real.
Amen. Hallelujah. Absolutely. Totally agree with you on that. Now, what would you say is the best piece of advice you received so far?
Well, I've received a lot of advice, and I try to learn every single day. And I tend to default back to the life is 10% what happens and 90% how we respond. And that fights a little bit with me with be more curious, but I'll stick with the first one. Life is 10% what happens, 90% how we respond. Would you ever go to Vegas and bet on the 10%? Of course not. Then learn to choose your response that isn't based upon the momentary negative. And objectively, a corollary to that is that objectively, on your darkest day and your darkest hour, even me laying on that operating table, 90% of the things in your life are good. And once you recognize that and you focus on that, and you realize that 90% is good in my worst day, and my response is everything what happened isn't, it takes your ego out of the mix. It takes your frustration and your negativity out of the mix, and it allows you to live in true gratitude.
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful things that I implemented for the past year and a half is first thing in the morning when I wake up, last thing before I sleep, is I count my blessings out loud. And it takes me at least 5 minutes. And after that, I feel tremendous.
I love that. I do something that is similar, is that I call it GGE. It's gratitude, growth, and exercise. But in the morning, I write down 3 non-repetitive things that I'm grateful for. The writing them down is different than saying them. Them being non-repetitive makes you really think. And I'm several years in and have never repeated. And the interesting part about that is the way our mind works, 2.5 weeks later, your brain chemistry will change. And even though you haven't thought about it, 12 hours later, you'll be more grateful. At night, I do the exact same thing, but it's growth. It's how did I get better? What did I learn today? And if I can't write something down, I grab a book that was sitting next to me, read for 15 minutes, and then do it, because I know that you either get better or worse every day. And if you think you're sitting still, you're getting passed by inflation. So I write that down. And then when I wake up in the morning, 2.5 weeks later, after my mind changes, when I wake up in the morning, I wake up thinking, how can I get better today? So now I'm approaching life with an attitude of growth and an attitude of gratitude. And when I put exercise in there as well, which allows, because motion trumps emotion, it allows me to get through the emotion and stay in objectivity and strategy and goodness. Now I've got all of the tent poles I need to have a successful day.
Love that. Amazing. Now, conversely, what would you say is the worst piece of advice you received so far?
Ignore the people. Their opinions don't count. I could grab a lot of different things, but so many times in my corporate career, I heard versions of that of, we don't care what they think. Their opinion doesn't matter.
Really?
What they think doesn't matter. Of course, that's common in the corporate world, is we've made the decision as the elite leaders, and their opinion and the other people's opinion doesn't matter. And they're just
other people down the food chain in the company.
That's very common in corporate, and it's disgusting and frustrating. But I hearing people say stuff like that of, just do what you need to do, make the hard decisions, nobody, those people don't matter. No, I got news for you guys. People do matter, and they matter a lot. And so anytime anyone gives me advice that says people don't matter, I'm not going to hear it. Now, I do think there is a line in there where you can say, hey, let's consider the voice of the people and the needs and the broader needs, and let's make a decision based upon that. That's different than saying people don't matter. So anything that goes that direction or is damaging or diminishing to the people and their pride and their engagement and their connection and their empowerment is a miss.
Totally. Wow. Fabulous. Love that. Now, speaking of advice, imagine that now today you add a time machine. You can go back in time and sit face to face with an 18-year-old Dan. What would be the number one piece of advice you would give to him, knowing all that you know now?
I get asked this every once in a while, and I love that you asked what would I say rather than what would I change, because I would change nothing.
Exactly.
And
everything happens for a reason, for us to learn to get
even the pain that I've been through.
Absolutely.
Without that pain, there are people I would not be able to speak to. So I wouldn't change anything. Totally. What would I say? It's difficult because I was a stubborn, arrogant little kid, even if I didn't mean to be. And I thought, like most teenagers, or like many teenagers, I thought I knew everything. Now every day I realize how much less I know.
Is that where the title of your book, The Unintentional Asshole, comes from?
The Unintentional Asshole. Yeah, it is. For that 20 years of me, I had a great heart. I cared about people. I had a great heart, but I had an ego the size of 3 buildings. And so that was a challenge. So what would I say to myself? I probably would, I might say something like, get over yourself, but I would more try to take a moment and explain people matter most. Relationships are everything. Don't worry about the rest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. And now, so since you already have your podcast, imagine that today you have the most special guest in the world, which is.
So you're going to be on.
No, yourself. Okay. Well, after me, yourself. So today you're interviewing yourself. What would be the first question that you want to ask yourself? Don't think too much. What is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Yeah. Wow. So I'll give you credit for that one. I've never been asked that question before. Nice. What would I ask? What would I ask myself?
The first question that you want to ask yourself, and don't think too much. What is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, it'd be the first question that I ask everybody. Tell me, what are your earliest memories? Where do you come from? Because I believe that what we go through as children has so much influence on what we become. And it informs so much, that path that we take informs everything else so much, that I would start where I start with everyone.
Love that. All right. And now, what is the one thing you're most grateful for?
That I have to say too, because my first instinct is to say my son, because I'm just every moment that I spend with him, I cherish and treasure. At the same point, and that's encapsulated by what I'm really most grateful for, which is that after never thinking that I would, after being caught in insecurity and indecision and ego and all of these things for so many years, and fear, that I have found my resonance and I understand what my mission is in the world, and that mission allows me to be in a position to support and help so many people as they achieve their dream. I'm incredibly grateful for that connection in the world, for that piece of knowing where I fit in such a way that things flow to me instead of me having to fight through them, because I never thought that would be true.
Love that. Now, the one question that I mentioned to you before and was my favorite, what is a small thing you've done so far that has had the biggest positive impact in your life in business so far? And by small, I don't mean something small. I just mean the one thing that you've done.
No, I got it. And you brought that up, and I've had 20 or 30 things that have gone through my head since you shared that question. Mm-hmm. There are lots of things that have of such a huge difference for me. Being told to be more curious, being told to not live to get comfortable in the gray, and all of those pieces.
What would be the most important one?
But I think that and you're saying the most important one that I've been told?
The one thing that you've done, the smallest
that I've
decision
that
you've,
I've done.
yeah, the smallest thing you've done that has had the biggest impact in your life. Doesn't have to be with an
Yeah.
advice, something that you've
No,
done
that's
yourself.
fine.
Yeah,
Chosen to intentionally spend a ton of one-on-one time with my son, to
absolutely.
make it a point that I would spend hours a day for years, no matter what, with my son. Because the first generational change that I was inspired to, we didn't talk a lot about this, but the very first time generational change came into my life, it was that I knew I wanted to create generational change in my own family.
Mhm.
And the opportunity to do that by having a different relationship with my son and a different level of support and engagement with my son than was had with me was the thing that was there. So that core change put me on this path. Now, I would mention, because I think it's very interesting to know you. I like your question about small thing. So if I can I give a part B
Please,
quickly to that? So
absolutely.
there's a message to this. We all have inflection points in our life, and most of us, I would believe, have 6 to 8 of them. Things that when you look back, usually looking back, very rarely do you see them looking forward. But when you look back, you go, my life completely changed because of that moment. And when you're in it, a lot of times you don't know, but you look back and you go, oh, that's it. The only one that I've really seen coming was when I made the decision to go speak in Asia for 45 days. I knew that was going to be one. But I'd like to share about the one that is the reason that I have my business and that I do what I do. That was the tiniest thing in the world, and I share it with you so that your audience can hear this and understand the impact of the tiny, kind things they do in the world, the really tiny ones that they never have any way of knowing. So here I am at karate one night, and it's a late night class. We get done. We're closing up the school and helping to get all the things done. And the teacher, who's a friend of mine, Master Terry, amazing, truly amazing guy. I have the utmost of respect for him. And now he runs a gym and does some really cool stuff. And we're walking out, and he says to me, he says, hey Dan, I listened to this podcast by Tim Ferriss, and I think you'd like it. That's it. The conversation was not much longer. It was 2 minutes long.
Was that before you got introduced to Tim Ferriss, or you already knew
Oh
about
yeah,
him?
I'd never heard of Tim Ferriss. I
Oh
didn't know.
wow,
I'd never listened to a podcast in my life.
wow.
This is 6 years ago. Never in my life had. I'm like, okay. And I trusted his recommendation. So I went home. I listened to it. By listening to it, I realized that I had been empty and I'd not been feeding into I'd been giving and giving, but I'd not been feeding into myself. By listening, I was able to start synthesizing. By listening, it was stirred in me that, wait, the reason you're unhappy and unfulfilled is because you're not doing what you're supposed to in the world. And as a result, within less than a year, as a result of that conversation leading me to Tim Ferriss, leading me to Jocko Willink, leading me to all these strategies and understanding and personal growth and getting back fired up in my life, I started my business. And it's the reason that I'm here today. And it's all because of a tiny kindness that was the inflection point of my life, where somebody just said, hey, I like you and I'd like to recommend this podcast to you. You have no concept of how a tiny action that you take will impact someone else in a positive or, God forbid, negative, but how the level of impact that it can have in someone's life. So treasure every moment and treat that with the respect that it deserves. And I give all the kudos to Master Terry, because he had no possible way of knowing, nor did I, that 5 years later we'd look back and say that was the inflection point that changed my life.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Now, one question that I
That's a small
really,
thing, right?
oh, it's a massive one. It's a massive, because it took your life in a new direction, opened so many doors for you. Now, if you hadn't recommended that podcast, maybe you would not have started your own podcast, and God knows where you would be now,
Right.
So it's just like 1 degree can make a massive difference in 5 years. One degree.
Now it's also, by the way, a good piece of advice for on the flip side, for you to be
Mhm.
open to the things that are flowing to you.
Oh
Is,
yeah.
had I been like, whatever, it's a podcast, and I never listened to it, I also wouldn't be
What a
here.
waste of
That
time. Yeah, exactly.
So what happened? Communication actually happened. It wasn't just a message, it was communication.
Totally, totally. Now, one question that I really want to ask to you, based on everything that you went through, because I've had some incredible human beings in my podcast that have gone through incredible tragedies that they had to overcome. And when I asked them, looking back at those incredible challenges, now, sure, at the time they were very challenging, painful, and tragic. But now looking back at them, 99% of them told me that looking back, those were incredible gifts, blessing in disguise that really opened their eyes to the true purpose of of their life here. Would you say the same thing about you after going and overcoming two suicide attempts and two heart attacks? Would you say that those were incredible blessings, gift in disguise for you? Sure, at the moment they stink like a bitch, but now looking back at them, would you say that those were like tremendous turning points in your life that brought you closer to your true purpose in this life and to open your eyes to what really mattered in this life and beyond?
I think that everything that we go through prepares us for what is to come.
Mhm.
And I think, like so many other things, I could either look at them with that 10% of what happened and say that individual thing was awful, or the 90% and how I choose to respond. And
Mm,
through a lot of my life, I would have told you, "Oh, woe is me. I grew up
exactly.
abandoned. I grew up abused. I grew up in poverty." I would have just taken that as a weight that dragged me to the bottom of the ocean, and I was drowning. But I would say that they're actually balloons that lift me up and that allow me, knowing now that my purpose is to create significant impact on the world, to help these million entrepreneurs so that they can create generational change. I'm honored to have been able to go through those things, to which then allows me to connect and share my story. The most important thing that we have is our story, to be able to share that with others in a way that can impact them, and others that if I hadn't gone through them, I could not possibly have reached. So each thing that I go through, if it allows me to reach one more person, then it is more than worth it. And so I would say I choose my response to be that these were all for good and all to help shape me into who I was to become, and to open up an audience that I otherwise would never have been able to reach.
Totally. And as a result of that, the new audience that is opening up to you, like from an objective side, sometimes you know we don't realize the obvious, but I'm sure you've realized that for you, maybe an obvious audience for you would be not going after, but helping men who have overcome heart attacks or men who have overcome suicide attempts, because you've been through that. You know exactly what it is like to go. You've been in the shoes. You understand in a very intimate way the challenges and what it takes to overcome that. Would you say that this could be a tremendous opportunity for you to help and impact these men?
I think there's an opportunity for that. And I
Mhm.
think for those right ones, they'll be drawn to it. Certainly men with suicide, that's a big part of the Light from Darkness Foundation. So I'm there. The men with heart attacks, I believe it allows the message that I have about dreams and all of these other
Mhm.
things to be, I think it allows them to be more receptive to that. But I'm also conscious that I speak with a pretty feminine voice. Not that I'm feminine, that's not what I'm saying. But if you think of masculine energy and feminine energy, I speak with a feminine energy, and I know that translates to a lot of different people. I also know that really helps men to be able to come through trauma. And so yes, there's an opportunity for that. But I'm glad to speak in those environments and support people and help people with that. At the same point, I'm really understanding that the message that I have, frankly, applies to all. When I aim outward, it's going to be at those groups we've talked about throughout the show. But I love to connect with all who are drawn to me.
Amazing. Wow. Listen, we can talk for hours. We're gonna wrap it up.
We
And this
have
is
talked for hours.
yeah, absolutely. And this is, I swear, I promise, the last question I want to ask you. And I want your utmost honesty. Give me tough love. Don't try to be nice and kind. Tell me, what can I do to improve this podcast?
Oh man, I'm always going to be kind. I think your podcast is I think your podcast is fantastic. I mentioned to you
Thank you.
earlier that I think the number one skill in the world is to be more curious, to ask more and better questions, and
Mhm.
you ask good questions. I suspect that the story flow varies from guest to guest. I haven't listened to a bunch of
Totally.
episodes, but
Yeah.
I might look at creating anchor posts to flow the story a little bit to where it
Mhm.
feels slightly more connected.
Mm,
I think too that I love the quality of the sound. I love all of those pieces. I love your background. Your voice is you were talking about my voice. Your voice is really cool. There are spaces where I think you could probably slow down a little bit
yes,
to make because as you get excited, much like most of us, you
you're a
speak a
passionate
little
guy.
faster and lose some of that
Mhm.
enunciation. But these are tiny things.
Especially
You
when
are serving the world.
especially when English is my third language. I need to slow
Right.
down and repeat and speak in a more in a way that people can actually understand me. Yes, I get,
See, you
I'm
speak your third language better than I speak my first. So I'm embarrassed to even say that. I speak two languages. I speak English and sarcasm. Every other language I've tried to learn, I lose.
wow,
I've studied four others and failed at all of them.
that's amazing. Wow. No, I appreciate this feedback. I know I've been given that advice before to slow down, but that's me. I have this Mediterranean blood that I'm passionate and I get going. When I get
Oh,
going,
it's great. I love the passion. And most of the time when I hear you speed up, you keep it really clear. But
Mm,
sometimes you do what a lot of us do, which is you'll keep your mouth tight and it'll mush a little. And
mm,
I have that problem. And particularly it's when we lean in for emotional stuff because we lean in and
yeah.
we shrink. And
Mm,
I've discovered that in myself as well. So I adore what you're doing. I love your
thank you.
energy and your connection, and
Love
I'm
that.
so thankful you're doing your thing.
Same here. Thank you. It's a blessing. We were meant to connect. I fully believe that everything happens for a reason and at the right time. And this the right time for us to connect was 2 weeks ago. And today, it's absolute honor to talk to you. So, if someone wants to reach out to you, Dan, what's the best way to do so?
Smoke signals. No, the best way
Mr.
is
The Bottle.
yeah, right, exactly. Probably the two best ways would be to either email me at dmcpherson@leadersmustlead.com or to message me on Facebook. Those are the two fastest. You're certainly I encourage you to check out the podcast Dreams Are Real and join our Dreams Are Real community on Facebook. That's another good way. And you can go to the website too, leadersmustlead.com. But the two fastest ways are absolutely email and Facebook Messenger.
Beautiful. Love. I'm gonna definitely put those on the show note as well as the title of your book. I love the title, The Unintentional Asshole. So
That's
what
right.
was the
Make
other?
sure you put dollar signs for the S's. That way you won't get in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, brother, absolute honor, pleasure, blast talking to you. What a glorious, glorious 2 episodes we've had today. We can do more, but maybe we'll do a follow up in a few months to see how things have evolved for you and all that. That would be an honor. And one of the questions that I want to borrow with you is, what do you think I should? What do you think I should talk to? That that I should talk, but I will ask that in reverse. What do you think that I know that would benefit you? So let me know. You have a list of all the people on my podcast. Anyone I would be honored to connect you with.
I appreciate that. And I know we know some of the same people, which is really cool. I know we know
Yeah,
Cassie and Johan and a bunch of others. And I am subscribed to your podcast. So
beautiful.
I will definitely take a look. And same to you. Feel free to look at the list and we're in. And I know we're going to do this in reverse where I get to ask you a bunch of questions and we're going to tell
Absolutely.
your story as well. So it's a fun time. Thanks so much for having me, man.
Absolute pleasure is all mine. I'm looking forward to that. I'm gonna book a time. I'm gonna make some time, take some time, serious time, at least 2.5, 3 hours, just to do this without any stress or time constraints. So, listen, pleasure, honor. I can't thank you enough. You're a wonderful soul. You're a true leader with a heart, with a beautiful mission, wonderful vision, and an incredible voice. You should definitely do look into TV or radio or anything, because now that you have this platform of your podcast, use that as a leverage. You should definitely be able to attract some higher caliber. Have you started reaching out to people in TV and radios, to LinkedIn or anything, to your podcast? Maybe you should. I would
Well,
recommend
I've been on a couple
approaching.
of TV shows and I've been on a couple of radio shows, but I
Maybe
haven't done any of them.
what I would recommend is try the approach of this Josh guy, reaching out to them and trying to inviting them on your podcast, build a connection, and then who knows what's gonna come out of that.
There you are. I appreciate the advice, man, and I will continue to move forward with that. I certainly want to share our podcast with the world, and I know
Absolutely.
you do too.
Listen, brother, stay safe, stay awesome, keep shining your light, keep spreading your beautiful message, and may your wonderful voice be heard far and out throughout not only this world but throughout the entire galaxy and universe. You really need it because you have a special message.
Same for the wishes to you and your heart, man. Put that out there and keep it out. Thank you so
All right,
much.
brother. Have a good one. Take care. Bye bye. Cheers.